The metal of the handcuffs bit into my wrists as I stood in the middle of my own driveway, shirt slightly damp from the sun and stress. 2 squad cars idled nearby, blue and red lights spinning lazily across the perfectly mowed lawn I'd worked on just yesterday. And there she was. Karen. Robe tied loosely over her nightgown, rollers still in her hair, face flushed and furious, as she pointed a shaking finger at me, like I was a burglar caught mid-break-in. "He tried to force his way in. I was terrified for my life," she screeched. "I live here. This is my house." My mouth opened to argue again, but what was the point? I'd already said it a dozen times. The officer gripping my arm glanced over at his partner, clearly torn. Then the older cop, the one who'd actually listened, cleared his throat and looked at Karen like she'd just tried to sell him oceanfront property in Kansas. "Ma'am," he said, voice slow and deliberate. "He's the owner. This is his property. The house, the guest house, all of it." Karen blinked. Her mouth twitched. For the first time since the chaos started, she hesitated. The officer turned back to me, loosening his grip slightly. "We're gonna need to sort this out." And right there, standing on my driveway in handcuffs while some squatter pretended she owned my backyard, I realized this had gone way beyond crazy. I exhaled hard and looked at the reader. You're probably wondering how we got here. Buckle up, because this isn't just some squatter story. This is what happens when the wrong person picks the wrong house and the wrong owner to mess with. When my uncle passed, I inherited more than just his house. I inherited a quiet piece of land tucked into the kind of neighborhood where lawns are always trimmed and the birds seem programmed to chirp on cue every morning. The main house was a modest 2-story colonial, nothing fancy, but it had charm. Ivy curled around the porch railings. The windows creaked like they had stories to tell, and inside still smelled faintly of Old Spice and lemon polish. My uncle was a creature of habit, a Marine-turned-accountant. He lived alone for the better, part of 2 decades, and everything he owned had a place, a label, or a drawer. Behind the main house sat a detached guest house. Nothing extravagant, just a converted garage with a kitchenette, bathroom, and enough space for a couch, bed, and maybe a desk. Growing up, we used to call it the clubhouse. It hadn't been used in years. My uncle was meticulous with it, too. He didn't rent it out, didn't let friends stay over. It was always locked, always empty. Or at least it was supposed to be. I'd only been living there a week, still living out of boxes, trying to figure out where my life was going after a bad breakup and a corporate layoff that hit me like a sucker punch. Moving in here was supposed to be a reset. Peace. Solitude. But starting night 3, things felt funny as the motion sensor lights in the backyard kept flickering on. I chalked it up to raccoons or deer. Then I started hearing soft thumps, muffled music. Sometimes the low, unmistakable hum of a television. I stood at my back window one night, watching as the guest house light turned on for 5 seconds, then off again. Weird, but I was tired. Maybe the wind, maybe faulty wiring. I was trying not to be paranoid, especially after all the horror stories about squatters and break-ins I'd been doom-scrolling on Reddit. But one morning just after sunrise, I saw it. Clear as day. I was sipping my coffee by the kitchen window when I caught a blur of movement in the backyard. The guest house door, which I hadn't touched since moving in, was swinging shut. Someone was inside. That was my line. I grabbed the spare key I'd found in my uncle's desk drawer, slipped on my shoes, and walked across the yard. My heart pounded, not from fear exactly, but from that adrenaline surge you get right before confrontation. I told myself it could be a stray animal, maybe the gardener, maybe some stupid mix-up, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. When I opened that door, the place was lived in, not just squatted, lived in like someone had moved in a month ago and made themselves comfortable. The air smelled like coffee and lavender dryer sheets. The bed was neatly made, clothes hung in the closet, shoes by the door. A half-finished jigsaw puzzle lay on the coffee table next to an open bag of pretzels. The fridge hummed softly behind me. I opened it. Milk, fresh eggs, a labeled Tupperware container that read Chicken Alfredo, Don't Touch. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a Keurig finishing its brew. I turned, and there she was, a middle-aged woman in pastel pajamas and a faded pink bathrobe, holding a steaming mug of coffee, staring at me like I was the one trespassing. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" she barked. I blinked, stunned into silence for a beat. "Your house?" She puffed up, eyebrows disappearing into her over-teased bangs. "Yes, my house. This is highly inappropriate, you know. Just walking into someone's home unannounced. What are you, some kind of creep?" I almost laughed. Almost. "Lady, this is my property," she scoffed. "That's rich. I've been living here for weeks. I even have a lease agreement with the previous owner." "No, you don't," I said flatly. She reached toward the counter and waved a crumpled piece of paper like it was a golden ticket. "Right here. I paid him cash in advance. He was such a sweetheart. Said I could stay as long as I needed." I stepped forward slowly, scanning the page. It was clearly printed off the internet, a basic template with blank spaces filled in. With sloppy handwriting, no official seal, no notarization. And my uncle's signature, it was a joke. A messy forgery at best, not even close to how he signed his name. "This is fake," I said, holding it up. "Karen, yes, of course her name was Karen." Snatched it back with a dramatic gasp. "Are you accusing me of forgery?" "I'm accusing you of trespassing." "Young man," she snapped. "I don't know who you think you are, but I live here now, legally. And unless you want a harassment charge on your record, I suggest you back off." I stared at her, stunned. The nerve, the confidence, the utter audacity. "Listen," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I just moved in. I own this place now. My uncle left everything to me in his will. There was no lease, no tenants. You're not supposed to be here." She tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "Well, maybe you're not supposed to be here." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're seriously squatting in my guest house and gaslighting me?" Karen crossed her arms, her mug still steaming. "This conversation is over. I have rights, and if you so much as step foot in here again without notice, I will call the police." I stared at her, stunned into silence. She turned and walked back toward the tiny kitchenette, humming like she hadn't just dropped the wildest reverse Uno card of all time. I backed out slowly, closed the door, and stood in the yard, blinking, at the guest house like it might disappear if I looked away and looked back again. But it didn't. Karen was real, and she was in my house, and somehow this was just the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the encounter in my head. The smug way Karen sipped her coffee, the forged lease, the way she twisted everything like she had some sort of legal upper hand. I tried to tell myself she'd come to her senses, that once I made it crystal clear she had no legal claim, she'd pack her bags and move on. I was wrong. The next morning, I marched back to the guest house with a printed copy of my uncle's will, the deed to the property, and a civil tone ready to go. I knocked, waited, and when she finally opened the door, she didn't look sleepy or startled. She looked prepared. "I'm not leaving," she said before I even opened my mouth. I held out the documents. "This house belongs to me. There's no record of any lease. You're trespassing. I'm giving you 2 days to move out before I escalate this legally." Karen didn't even glance at the papers. Instead, she took a dramatic sip from another one of her endless mugs and said, "That's cute, but I already spoke to my lawyer." I blinked. "What?" "My lawyer," she repeated, as if it gave her diplomatic immunity. "He says I have tenant rights, that once someone establishes residency, you can't just kick them out. It's called a civil matter, sweetheart. Look it up." I had looked it up. The law in our state did make it ridiculously easy for someone to claim tenant protections, even without a real lease, so long as they'd received mail at the address or lived there for more than a few days. The gray area was wide, and Karen was swan diving into it head first. "Karen," I said, trying to remain calm, "there's no record of you ever paying my uncle rent. You forged a lease. This won't hold up." Her smile widened. "Then take to court." That night, I found a bright yellow sticky note plastered to the door of the guest house in bold Sharpie. Tenant rights apply. Do not trespass. Any further harassment will be reported. Harassment? I was the owner. But the next morning, the situation got even more surreal. A city vehicle pulled into my driveway. An inspector stepped out, clipboard in hand, looking vaguely annoyed before I even said hello. Got a complaint about unsafe living conditions in the guest house, he said. Mold, faulty wiring, ventilation issues. I nearly choked. From who? He looked at his sheet. A Ms. Karen Withers. I rubbed my temples. She's not even supposed to be in. There. Well, legally, I have to follow up. If someone's claiming residence, we're obligated to investigate. He poked around, asked to look at the HVAC unit, jotted some things down, and left with a shrug. I felt like I was living in some kind of Kafka-esque sitcom. Later that day, I heard Karen yelling from the backyard, "You might want to mow your lawn. Property values are tanking because of you." She'd tossed a bag of fast food trash right over the fence into my flower bed, and when I confronted her about it, she started recording me with her phone. "You're harassing me," she shrieked. "This is all going to my lawyer. Keep it up and you'll be in jail." I backed away with my hands up. She wasn't just squatting, she was playing the system, and winning. So I did what any frustrated, halfway rational person would do. I called the non-emergency police line. When the cop showed up, he was polite but bored, clearly used to nonsense calls. I explained the whole situation, showed him the deed, the will, the fake lease, even the trash photos. He nodded, took some notes, then delivered the punch I knew was coming. Unfortunately, this is a civil matter. I blinked. She's living in my guest house without permission. She forged a lease. She's throwing garbage on my property and yelling at me every day. I get it, and I'm not saying she's in the right, the officer said. But unless you can prove she broke in or committed a criminal act, it's going to fall under landlord-tenant law. You'll need to file for eviction. Eviction? How long does that take? Could be 30 to 90 days. More if she contests it. I stood there on my front lawn, stunned. The system had basically handed her the keys. From that point on, it was like Karen had been given a green light. She turned the guest house porch into a hoarder's paradise. Old furniture, a cracked garden gnome, a plastic flamingo, and even a kiddie pool filled with rainwater cluttered the yard. She started blasting 80s hair metal at 8 a.m., and again at midnight. She yelled insults when I walked past. "Landlord loser" was her favorite, and sprayed the grass near my feet with her hose whenever I got too close. At one point, I saw her hosting what looked like a book club with 2 other robe-wearing women drinking boxed wine out of coffee mugs. My sanctuary had turned into a circus. I documented everything, photos, videos, a daily log of incidents. I called a lawyer who confirmed the nightmare. Karen might be removed quickly if we could prove the lease was fake, and if we could get a sympathetic judge. Big ifs. Meanwhile, she was living rent-free and treating my property like a college dorm. Gone feral. The worst part? Every time I looked out the window and saw her twirling around in her robe, feeding a stray cat or waving sarcastically at the neighbors. I knew she was enjoying this. She wanted to push me. She wanted to get under my skin, and it was working. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have predicted, was that I wasn't just some clueless homeowner she could steamroll. Was biding my time, because if the system wouldn't fix this, then I'd have to get creative. I knew yelling wouldn't fix this. I knew logic wouldn't either. Karen was a manipulator, good at playing dumb when it served her, smarter than... She looked when it came to exploiting legal loopholes, but she was sloppy, arrogant, and I was done playing defense, so I went digging. My late uncle had kept everything, receipts, letters, taxes, even labeled folders of weird neighbors in a dusty filing cabinet in the garage. I started there, combing through old records by flashlight, the dust so thick I was sneezing every 10 minutes. After hours of sorting, I struck gold, a receipt for the installation of a home surveillance system. I'd seen cameras on the roofline but assumed they were old and non-functional. They weren't. The DVR was still connected in the basement closet. The password was literally password, and once I logged in, I scrolled back through months of footage frame by frame, and there she was. 2 weeks after my uncle's funeral in broad daylight, Karen pulled a rolling suitcase up the side path and let herself into the guest house. No key, no moving truck, just a single suitcase and a smug look on her face. She had moved in while the house sat vacant. No lease, no permission, just opportunity, and a total lack of shame. I sent the footage to a real estate attorney. Then I hired a private investigator just to be thorough. Within a week, the PI came back with exactly what I'd hoped for. Karen had been evicted from another property in a neighboring town for doing the exact same thing. Fake lease, refusal to leave, claimed tenant rights until the owner paid her off to vacate. Pattern documented. Game on. Next, I made sure Karen knew she was being watched. I installed a brand new, clearly visible outdoor security camera directly facing the guest house. Right underneath it, I hung a massive red and white sign, "Private property, no tenants reside here." Then came the cherry on top, a formal-looking eviction notice. It wasn't legally binding just yet, but it looked official. I laminated it, taped it dead center on the guest house door, and waited. It didn't take long. Within hours, I caught Karen on camera tearing down the notice with both hands, crumpling it, and flipping off the camera. Her voice, loud and clear, rang through my phone thanks to the audio system. "Nice try, jackass. I'm not going anywhere. You'll have to pay me to leave like the last sucker did." Gotcha. The next morning, she left me a voicemail filled with threats. "You harass me again and I swear I'll get a restraining order. I'm calling the mayor. I know people. You messed with the wrong woman." I forwarded it to my lawyer. Then, as if karma couldn't wait to assist, the private investigator called again with a smoking gun. A phone recording he obtained by following her to a diner where she loudly bragged to a friend about her little setup. Her voice came through crystal clear in the transcript. "I've done this before. You squat long enough, make it miserable, and the owners just pay you to go. It's genius. Free rent, no bills." I don't know if she realized she was being recorded, or if she was just high on her own delusion, but that tape was a bombshell. My lawyer called the next day, practically vibrating with excitement. "We've got her. That footage, the fake lease, her past eviction history, and now this recorded confession. It's a textbook case of fraudulent tenancy and property squatting." We filed a formal unlawful detainer lawsuit, this time with heavy documentation, video evidence and witness statements. No more gray areas, no more civil limbo. The judge would have everything they needed to see what Karen really was. But I wasn't finished yet. I wanted her exposed, publicly. So I reached out to the local news station, gave them everything, not just for me, but for the next homeowner she'd target. This woman had been doing this for years and getting away with it, not anymore. The segment was scheduled to air the following week. Until then, I kept my cool. I mowed the lawn, watered the flowers, smiled when she screamed at me from across the fence. She had no idea the walls were closing in, and I was loving every second of it. I came home to red and blue lights spinning across my driveway. 2 cruisers, 3 officers, one of them already halfway up my front steps. My stomach sank. I barely had time to park before one of the cops approached with a firm tone. "Sir, we need to speak with you. Please step over here." I glanced toward the guest house. There she was, Karen, clutching a tissue, voice trembling, eyes glassy like she'd just escaped a horror movie. She was absolutely thriving under the attention. "He tried to break in," she sobbed. "He screamed at me. He said he was going to make me leave no matter what it took. I feared for my life." "Oscar-worthy," one of the officers held up a hand. "We got a 911 call from Ms. Withers stating you attempted to unlawfully enter her residence and made verbal threats. We need to get your side of the story." I took a deep breath. This was her final move. The nuclear option. She knew she was cornered, so she went all in. 911, false report, fake panic, and dramatic tears. If I hadn't been prepared, I might have been cuffed on the spot, but I was prepared. Calmly, I unlocked my phone. "Officer," I said, "this is my property. The guest house is on the same deed. Karen has no legal lease, no rental agreement, and she's never paid a dime. I've already filed an unlawful detainer lawsuit, and she's under investigation for squatting in a prior home. I'd like to show you some evidence." They gave me a look, skeptical but listening. I pulled up the video footage first. Karen dragging her suitcase onto the property weeks after my uncle's funeral, clearly letting herself in without permission or a key. Then the time-stamped footage of her tearing down my sign, screaming at the camera. Next, I played the voicemail she left, threatening to get me arrested, calling me a dumb landlord loser. Finally, I opened the file with the audio recording the private investigator captured, her own voice bragging about squatting and running the same scam before. The officers exchanged glances. One of them walked back toward Karen. "Ma'am," he said, flipping his notebook, "do you have any legal lease or documentation proving you're a tenant?" I told you," Karen stammered, visibly rattled now. "The previous owner. He said I could stay. He and I had an agreement." "Verbal?" the cop asked. "Yes, it was verbal, but he said, the previous owner is deceased, correct?" She swallowed hard. "Yes." "Do you have any evidence he gave you permission to live here?" Silence. "Do you have any proof of payment? Rent, emails, texts, anything at all?" Karen's hands trembled as her tissue fell to the grass. He let me stay. He told me I could." The officer straightened. "Ma'am, based on what we're seeing here and the evidence provided, it appears you are unlawfully occupying this property. Making a false emergency report is a serious offense. Do you understand that?" Karen's eyes widened. "Wait, what? No, he's the one harassing me. You called 911 and claimed he threatened your life. There's no evidence of that. In fact, there's more than enough here to suggest this is a fraudulent tenancy." She started to backpedal. I was scared. I thought he was going to hurt me. I've seen him watching me. He installed a security camera on his property, which you vandalized. We have video of that too." The second officer looked at me. "Sir, would you like to press charges for trespassing or vandalism?" "I'll let my lawyer handle it," I said, never breaking eye contact with Karen. "But yes, I'm filing every charge I legally can." Karen's facade cracked. Her voice rose an octave. "You can't do this. I have rights. This is my home now." One of the cops turned to her. "Not according to the county records, ma'am." That was the moment her eyes darted back and forth. Her mouth moved, but no words came out. It hit her. She'd lost control of the story. The mask had slipped and there was no more room to fake her way out of it. And I stood there calm, arms folded, while the whole house of cards came crashing down. 2 days after the 911 stunt, my lawyer called me with the final nail in the coffin. "We got it," he said, almost giddy. "Emergency injunction granted. The judge reviewed the footage and your PI's report. She has 48 hours to vacate, or the sheriff will physically remove her." I didn't have to wait that long. The next morning, a black and white sheriff's vehicle rolled up. Karen had no clue what was coming. I watched from my kitchen window as she answered the knock, robe half-tied, mug of coffee in hand like it was just another day in her house. When the deputy handed her the court order, I saw the shift in her face. Shock, confusion, then panic. "You can't do this," she said, her voice cracking. "This is my home. I have rights." "You had 48 hours, the deputy said coolly. "Your time's up." I stepped outside and leaned against the porch rail, watching as she scrambled back inside, trying to pack up a few essentials. The deputy gave her 15 minutes. She used every second to slam drawers, throw things into garbage bags, and curse the entire legal system. She came out dragging her suitcase, the same one I'd seen on the security footage when this whole mess began. Her robe flapped in the wind like some pathetic cape as she hurled one last insult my way. "You're a monster. You'll be sorry." I raised an eyebrow. Pretty sure the court disagrees. As she was escorted off the property, a neighbor caught the whole thing on camera from across the street. Within hours, the clip was posted to the local neighborhood Facebook group. "Squatter caught living in guest house, kicked out on live stream." The video blew up. Hundreds of comments, people laughing, tagging friends. Turns out Karen had ruffled more than a few feathers in the area. false HOA complaints, shouting matches over property lines, screaming at kids for being too loud. Everyone loved seeing her get her comeuppance. It didn't stop there. After the story spread, more people came forward. She'd done this before, twice. Once in the next town over, once a few cities away. Different names, same scam. Fake leases, squat and stall, demand payoffs. But now, she was radioactive, blacklisted from every rental site, her name flagged in tenant databases. Last I heard, she was living in her car a few blocks away, still claiming she'd been set up. Maybe she was still spinning tales to whoever would listen. Maybe she still thought she was the victim. But I was back in my home, quiet, peaceful, and finally mine again. And every time I walk past the guest house, I smile just a little. Because I know, this time karma actually knocked first. Peace at last. The first morning after Karen was gone, I brewed a fresh cup of coffee and stepped onto the back porch. For the first time since I moved in, the air felt still. No blaring music, no shouting, no drama. Just birdsong, sunlight through the trees, and silence. It felt like the house could finally breathe again. I walked past the guest house on my way to the garden. The door was shut, the lights off, empty, and that's exactly how I like it. Since then, I've installed a new fence with coded locks, upgraded all the security cameras, and added motion lights that alert straight to my phone. No more chances, no more freeloaders. Lesson learned the hard way. Sometimes I catch neighbors pointing at the guest house, still sharing the story. The Facebook video lives on, occasionally making the rounds again when someone brings up that squatter lady. I don't mind. She made herself infamous. I just cleaned up the mess. Now I get to enjoy the home my uncle left me the way he would have wanted. Peaceful, safe, mine. And every now and then I raise my coffee mug toward the guest house and whisper, "Not today, Karen."